Hey everybody, it's James Mahoney here from Black Lobster Academy. Welcome to part 6 of my introduction to Adobe Photoshop for illustrators and artists. In the last episode we covered pretty thoroughly how to use layers, including things like blend modes, layer styles, layer masks, adjustment layers, and clipping layers. In this episode we're going to address basic transformations, fills, and working with patterns. Okay, let's get on it. Basic transformations. Transformations and fills will make changes to the selected area. If there is no active selection, then it will make the changes to the selected layer. Let's start off with the thing you're going to use the most, the free transform. While you can access this stuff from the Edit Transform menu, you can also access most of this directly from the very useful Free Transform tool. From this menu you can also access the 90-degree rotations and flipping horizontal and vertical. For tutorials, I use the standard Photoshop keyboard shortcuts, but for actual work I use a custom set of hotkeys. At the very least, I recommend setting up custom keyboard shortcuts to flip horizontal, both selection and image, and to rotate 90 degrees. Okay, so for the transformation tool, hit Command-T to activate the transformation rig. In this case I have a layer selected, and so only the contents of this layer will be transformed. Notice how this tool has square handles at the corners and at the center of each edge. You can click and drag on any of these to make a basic transformation. As usual, the option bar up top offers some useful entry fields, so you can make accurate numeric transformations. This button here will lock the aspect ratio if you want to be sure not to distort your image, but you can also use the Shift key for this. These numbers are the actual pixel dimensions of the selection. This triangle would switch these to be relative. So for example, if you want to scale this down so that it is, let's say, 15 pixels smaller vertically, you can either do the math yourself or you can let Photoshop do it by setting this to be relative. Like all the numeric input fields in Photoshop, you can click and drag on the name to change them, or just type in a number. But mostly what you'll do is just grab a handle and make your changes. If you move your cursor outside the rig, it'll change to a rotation icon. Click and drag to rotate about the center point. You can move the center point or pivot point by clicking and dragging on it. Or you can hold down the Option key and click anywhere to position it. At any time you can click inside the box and move the selection. As expected, you can use modifier keys to change the type of transformation you're making. Consistent with other things in Photoshop, hold down the Shift key to scale without changing proportions. Also consistent with other UI, if you hold down the Option key, it'll make the transformation symmetrical about the center or pivot point. Other modifier keys will create various types of distortions. You can do what everyone else does and click on a handle and then try all combinations of the modifier keys until you get the right transformation. Or you can memorize the following. Command key will do a distortion. This is most useful as you can then just position each corner wherever you need it. Or you can use Shift and Command to skew the image. You can hold all three modifiers to create a perspective distortion with Shift, Option, and Command. Notice how these distortions can be changed based on where the pivot point is. If you have a selection, these transformations will naturally be applied only to the selected area. Here's a useful trick. You can use the ruler tool to rotate an image accurately. Lots of times your source image is just slightly rotated, like this image I took on a boat in France just last week. The ruler tool can be found in the submenu of the eyedropper. Select it and line up a ruler line with the horizon and hit Straighten Layer in the options bar. This also works for vertical lines. Fills and patterns. Hit the letter D to reset your foreground and background colors to the default black and white. You can use the shortcut X to switch them. Option and Delete will fill the active selection with the foreground color, while Command and Delete will fill it with the background color. If nothing is selected, it will fill the entire active layer. Delete will clear the layer or selection. For more options, use Edit, Fill, or better yet, Shift F5. Content-aware fill is very similar to the healing brush tools mentioned in episode 3. It seems to work best for smallish areas or where the surrounding pixels have a consistent pattern. But I mainly want to show you the pattern fills. Use Shift F5 to bring up the dialog and switch Use to Pattern. You can set the blend mode and opacity here, but it's probably more flexible to use the layer properties to control these things. Click on the thumbnail to get access to all your patterns. Select a pattern and hit OK or Enter. As usual, this gear will give you access to your pattern libraries, where you can load and save them as you want. The problem with creating patterns this way is that you can't control the scale of the texture at this point. It's better to use a layer style to do this, as I showed in the previous video on layers. Let's create a new pattern. M for the marquee tool. Fill with the background color using Command and Delete. Paint in some pattern. From the Edit menu, find Define Pattern. Now this pattern will be accessible from any of the pattern menus. Let's go back to the layer style and fill with this new pattern. You can adjust the scale here. If you want to learn about creating seamless tiles, I have a video that covers this on my YouTube channel at Black Lobster. I also cover how to use patterns to create all kinds of materials and textures in my digital illustration course offered at blacklobsteracademy.com. These patterns can also be used with custom brushes. Other transformations. Everyone always talks about the liquify tool, and it's great, but for my money, the warp tool is even more useful. You can access this transformation tool either from the Edit menu or from the free transformation tool option bar. This drop-down provides access to a bunch of different preset warps. With the warp tool, you get a rig that is a 3x3 grid, You can click anywhere inside the grid and move to transform the image. Each corner has handles that you can grab and manipulate for even more control. Sometimes you'll find yourself doing this just because it's fun, and you should stop that and get back to work. You can find some other transformation-like tools under Filter, Distort, such as Pinch, Spherize, Shear, stuff like that. Another fun transformation type of filter is liquify. Find this under Filter, Liquify. This filter really deserves its own tutorial. It gets used a lot for modifying body types and things like that. Sometimes used to make caricatures. The gist of it is that the tool lets you push pixels around as if it was a rubbery goo. This top tool here lets you push things. Little amounts are usually the way to go. This tool here lets you pump up the forms. And this one does the opposite, making her look a lot more full-figured in this case. Puppet Warp can be accessed from the Edit menu. It also deserves its own tutorial, but the basic idea is that you click on the mesh to create pins. Things that are pinned will not move, but the mesh can rotate around them. So you generally add a bunch of pins and then select one and hold down the Option key to rotate the mesh around that selected pin. That wraps up this episode on basic transformations. We covered using the free transform tool, fills, creating and filling with patterns, and some warping tools. In the next episode, I'll go over how to learn to love the pen tool and all the cool things you can do with paths. Thanks a lot, and as always, I appreciate any feedback, likes, and subscribes.